You are listening to The Evidence Locker. Thank you for choosing our podcast. Our sponsors make it possible for us to keep bringing you new episodes. Please support them as they have some great deals just for you, our listeners. If you prefer to listen to ad-free content, simply find us on Patreon, where plans start from as little as $2 a month. 25% of these proceeds are donated to the Doe Network, working to bring closure to international cold cases. For more information, follow the link in the show notes. Today's episode is brought to you by Gusto and Calm. Gusto is a convenient and sustainable meal delivery service for cooking healthy meals at home. For 60% off your first box and 25% off all boxes for 2 months, go to gusto.co.uk and use code EVIDENCE. Calm is the #1 wellness app that offers guided meditations, sleep stories, breathing exercises, and other relaxation techniques to help you reduce stress and improve your mental well-being. Go to calm.com/evidence to receive a special offer of 40% off a Calm premium subscription. Find the links to Gusto and Calm in the show notes of today's episode. Our cases deal with true crimes and real people. Some parts are graphic in nature, and listener discretion is advised. Each episode is produced with the utmost respect to the victims, their families, and loved ones. A large luxury alpine chalet stood empty on the hill overlooking the town of Grand-Bornand. The family of 5, whose laughter and conversation usually filled the room, was nowhere to be found. It did not look like they had left town, seeing as the fridge was still full of fresh food. Signs of a recent fire were in the fireplace, and the table was set for dinner. What was unusual about this scene was how spotless everything was. In a house with 3 children under the age of 11, there would typically be some things lying around or some unwashed dishes. But on this quiet day, there was absolutely nothing. Everything had been packed away and cleaned. The mysterious disappearance of the Flactif family raised many questions, especially about the patriarch Xavier and his business dealings. But in the end, the answer as to what happened to them was found much closer to home. 41-year-old Xavier Flactif was a well-to-do property developer and lived with his partner, 36-year-old Graziella Ortolano, and their 3 kids in the alpine village of Grand-Bornand, Haute-Savoie, France. The Flactif kids spent a lot of time on the slopes, and 7-year-old Gregory, 10-year-old Letitia, and 11-year-old Sarah were all well known in the nearby resort town of La Clusaz. Letitia was a champion skier and always won local competitions. Graziella's 14-year-old son Mario lived with his father in Pas-de-Calais, where he attended school, but he visited his mother, stepfather, and half-siblings every chance he got. The Flactif family were originally from the north of France and had moved to Haute-Savoie in 1999. The Grand-Bornand has just over 2,000 residents, mostly quiet people living in the upscale location. Xavier did not come from money. Whatever he owned, he had earned himself. And he was not shy about showing off either. Theirs was by far the biggest house in town, built on the mountainside overlooking the village. Xavier and Graziella drove luxury vehicles. There were about 4 in their garage. Xavier took his family on expensive vacations abroad and demanded only the best. Xavier made his fortune in property. He bought land for a reasonable price, then built luxury chalets, which he sold to English and Dutch clients. By all accounts, business was ticking over nicely, and Xavier seemed to have made the perfect life for himself and his family. On the morning of Saturday, April 12, 2003, Graziella's son, Mario Ortolano, arrived at Lyon Airport, and a local taxi driver from Le Grand-Bornand was waiting for him, as per usual. He was supposed to arrive on Friday, but had a commitment at his school. The drive from Lyon to his family home was about an hour, and typically his mother would call him while he was on his way. However, on that day, there was no call. When Mario walked up to the front door of the Flactif's chalet, the taxi driver waited to make sure the boy made it safely inside. Strangely, the front door was locked, and no one appeared to be home. He was a bit confused and wondered if there had been a miscommunication. He could not reach his mother on her cell phone, and went back to the taxi where he waited for a while. But as time passed, there was still no word from his mom, so he decided to go to the nearby house of a family friend, Christine. Like Mario, Christine thought it was very odd that his mother wasn't home when he arrived, as she always looked forward to seeing him. Both assumed that there had been a mix-up with dates, and Mario stayed the night. In the morning, Christine accompanied Mario to the Flactif chalet, and again, no one was home. They forced their way in and were baffled about the state of the house. Inside, the curtains were drawn and the lights were on. The table was set for dinner. As for the rest of the house, it was spotless, unusually tidy for a bustling home with 3 children. Mario went upstairs and found that all linen had been stripped off the beds, and the mattresses were bare. This was very unusual. 2 laptops were strangely open and switched on, an out-of-place sign of life in an otherwise silent house. Mario also noticed that one of their cars was gone, a red Toyota Land Cruiser. He knew Xavier had the tendency to drive fast, even recklessly along the narrow mountain roads, and thought that perhaps there had been an accident, and maybe the car had gone off the road into a ravine. Frantic and still unable to reach Graziella or Xavier on their cell phones, Mario and Christine informed police about the bizarre scene and their theory about the possible car accident. Local officers arrived at the chalet, had a quick walkthrough, and agreed that something did not feel right. Patrol vehicles drove along the surrounding mountain roads and could not locate any trace of Xavier's recognizable Land Cruiser either. Police returned to the Flactif chalet the next day, with a specialist police team to search the property, but could not find any signs of foul play. It simply looked like the entire family had up and left, then disappeared into thin air. Curiously, though, by the time police arrived at the house, the laptops that Mario and Christine both saw the day before were gone. Investigators questioned friends and neighbors, but came up with very little useful information. With no trace of the Flactif family, police put out an alert to all regions in France, as well as neighboring countries Switzerland and Italy, to keep an eye out for their vehicle. We'll take a quick break for a word from our sponsors. If you're like me, you start wondering what to make for dinner as soon as you finish lunch. And honestly, that kind of mind space is such a waste. Gusto makes meal planning easy. With a few clicks of a button, you can choose your recipes for the week and have all the ingredients delivered right to your doorstep. No more running to the grocery store after work or trying to plan meals at the last minute. Gusto takes the stress out of meal planning and makes cooking fun again. They deliver fresh, nutritious ingredients straight to your doorstep, with recipes that are designed to be cooked with ease. Say goodbye to takeout and unhealthy convenience foods, and say hello to delicious, homemade meals that your whole family will love. Gusto is perfect for busy families on the go. With over 50 recipes to choose from each week, there's something for everyone. Whether you're looking for kid-friendly meals, vegetarian options, or healthy choices to fit your dietary needs, Gusto has you covered. With pre-portioned ingredients, you'll never have to worry about wasting food or trying to figure out what to do with the leftovers. Gusto takes pride in the quality of their ingredients. They work directly with suppliers to ensure you're getting the freshest, highest quality ingredients possible. And with the focus on sustainability, Gusto uses recyclable and biodegradable packaging, making it an environmentally friendly choice. So if you're looking for a convenient and healthy way to cook for the whole family, give Gusto a try. For 60% off your first box and 25% off all boxes for 2 months, head to gusto.co.uk and use code EVIDENCE. Find the link in the show notes. During the first days of the investigation, there was a strong degree of victim blame in the media. Rumors began circulating through town about the state of Xavier's financial affairs. A theory emerged that Xavier had landed himself in hot water with a business deal, and that he had taken his family and fled the country. It emerged that Xavier Flactif had angered many people over the years. He lined his own pocket with no scruples and neglected to pay workers and abandoned building projects as soon as he cashed final checks. Clients were stuck with unfinished homes and workers demanding payment. News headlines called Xavier a crook, a charming charlatan, and so on. Photos of Xavier drinking champagne and living the high life were everywhere. He was portrayed as a fat cat with no scruples who stepped on others to raise himself up. Meanwhile, The family's loved ones were desperate for them to be found, not believing for 1 minute that they had fled Haute-Savoie. For starters, Graziella was very protective of Mario and would never have left him behind. To people who knew the family, the runaway theory simply did not add up. As for Xavier's business acumen, a judge later painted him in a forgiving light, saying that he was a friendly thug who sometimes pushed legal limits, but with whom you could always sort things out. Investigators went through Xavier's 71 banking accounts with a fine comb and discovered that the property mogul's finances were indeed messy. Despite his flashy lifestyle, high debt added up to more than 2.7 million euros. The Flactif family house was searched once more. It was clear that they were planning on having a family dinner together. The table was set. There was food in a pot on the stove that had been cooked and was ready to be heated up. It did not look like they had packed anything for a holiday, and police were doubtful that they had planned to leave. Upstairs, the bed linen had been removed from the children's beds and a small square of staircase carpet had been neatly cut out. Even though the kitchen and living areas were clean and tidy, Xavier's upstairs office looked like it had been ransacked. Investigators felt that something was strange about the scene and felt a deep sweep of the house was essential. This is when they found 7 tooth fragments, as well as brown specks in between the floorboards in the living room. They also discovered a .635 caliber gun cartridge. Local gendarmes understood that the chalet was probably the scene of a brutal crime. Fearing that they did not have the resources and experience required to deal with the magnitude of the investigation, they called the National Institute for Criminal Research for help. On May 11th, a team of the country's best forensic investigators descended on the Flactif residence and set out to process the scene further. Using Blue Star, a chemical solution that reacts to the iron found in blood, crime scene investigators processed the living room first. Although nothing was visible to the naked eye, after applying Blue Star in the dark, the entire room lit up. They determined that a copious amount of blood had been spilled and cleaned up at some point. It was a bloodbath. And this continued throughout the house. From the basement to the living room and kitchen, traces of blood were everywhere. Disturbingly, in the doorway of one of the children's bedrooms were drag marks. Signs that someone had made a concerted effort to clean it up were visible too. A picture of a diabolical slaughter emerged, and even the most hardened detectives found it hard to stomach. Police feared the worst for the Flactif family. Of course, there was a slight hope that it had only been a brutal attack, and that the family was held hostage somewhere, or perhaps they were hiding out. But realistically, the searches that continued throughout the summer were mainly focused on looking for the family's bodies. Police divers, sniffer dogs, search teams, everyone was out looking. DNA tests eventually confirmed that the blood found in the chalet belonged to all 5 members of the Flactif family: Xavier, Graziella, Gregory, Letitia, and Sarah. But then there was also DNA from a 6th, unidentified person. With the sheer amount of blood found, chances of survival were extremely slim, and it was determined that the family had been murdered. Further blood evidence revealed more about the location of each body. Graziella was attacked in the basement. Gregory's blood was in the kitchen in front of the fridge. A pool of Xavier's blood was close to Gregory's, also on the kitchen floor. The DNA could not differentiate between the 2 sisters, but tooth fragments provided an answer. Letitia had received a filling from a local dentist not long before the disappearance. So investigators concluded that it was Letitia who was attacked in the living room and that Sarah was the one who died upstairs in her bedroom. But where were their remains? A month after the Flactif family came up missing, their red Toyota Land Cruiser was found abandoned at the Geneva airport, about an hour's drive away. Most of the interior carpeting had been removed, and it had been cleaned. However, forensic testing uncovered traces of blood throughout the vehicle. Again, the blood of all 5 Flactifs showed up. In an attempt to track down the 6th person whose DNA was found at the house, police took samples from family members, friends, business associates, neighbors, anyone who has ever had contact with the Flactif family. Eventually, 300 saliva swabs were tested. Police became suspicious of the Flactif family's neighbor, 31-year-old David Hatyat, when he refused to provide a sample. He had no criminal record, and according to his family, he was a quiet, hardworking man. Those who knew him in Haute-Savoie, on the other hand, saw him as a social climber who lived above his means. On the day forensic investigators processed the scene inside of the Flactif home, a gendarme noticed someone who seemed particularly interested in the operation. It was none other than David Haute, who was keeping an eye on the Flactif chalet from his apartment using binoculars. A local news crew interviewed various neighbors in the days after the family vanished, and David Haute and his girlfriend had a lot to say. David worked as a mechanic and told them about his high-flying landlord and his riches. That he had leather armchairs, a big screen TV, multiple cars. David's girlfriend, Alexandra Lefebvre, who worked as a cleaner for the Flactif family for a short time, was clearly not a fan of Xavier's and said this during her interview. There are always problems with lots of different people. It was about things like stuff wasn't finished, workers not being paid. People complained. They needed the money. During the news insert, Alexandra is seen blowing off steam to the camera, while David hovers in the background, shaking his head in agreement, apparently appalled at the way Xavier Flactif conducted business. He also made an unsettling remark. It was total carnage in that house. How did he know what the inside of the house looked like after the disappearance? Also, Mario and Christine said it looked like it had been cleaned. What did David Haute know? Investigators told him that by refusing to provide a DNA sample, he had moved up on their list of suspects. They pressured him to cooperate, and he relented. On the 14th of July, within 48 hours, the test results were in. The sixth person present in the Flactif home at the time of the murders was David Haute. It seemed unbelievable. Why would a young father murder his neighbors and their children? It was time to look into David Haute's background to find more about his relationship with the Flactif family. David had lived in Le Grand-Bornand for 2 years with his partner Alexandra and their 2 children. With the picturesque backdrop of their new home, they hoped to rise up from their working-class status. But David was a mechanic with no other qualifications, and Alexandra a cleaning lady, which proved difficult in an area where the cost of living is very expensive. They struggled to fit in and hardly had any friends. However, investigators tapped the couple's phones and learned about their closest and only friends, Stefan and Isabel Haremza. David met Stefan at work, and it seemed Alexandra and Stefan's wife Isabel also enjoyed each other's company. The 4 of them existed in a bubble separate to those around them. They had all moved to Haute-Savoie from the north of France and were disillusioned about life in the Alps. To make ends meet, David and Stefan went on a petty crime spree and managed to get away with it for some time. Police searched David Haute and Alexandra Lefebvre's apartment and found damning evidence. Traces of blood, a baby tooth fragment. In their garage were also toys belonging to the Flactif children. The net was closing in. On the 16th of September, 5 months after the family was reported missing, police arrested David, Alexandra, and their friends Stefan and Isabel Haremza. The arrest was a massive operation, involving no less than 80 gendarmes. David was taken down on his way to work. Alexandra was arrested at home, and their young children were taken into social care. When Haute learned that his DNA was found at the scene, he opened up and confessed to the murders. He explained that he had moved his family to the Alps after seeing a property advertised by Xavier Flactif. When Haute arrived in the Haute-Savoie, the advertised chalet was still under construction, and Flactif put Haute's family up in a smaller apartment. While waiting for the home they had relocated for, they were moved around all the time on the whim of Xavier Flactif. When construction came to an end, Flactif rented the home to another family. Haute told police that his dislike of Flactif had grown into a deep-seated resentment. According to Haute's confession, he had decided to go to the Flactif home to confront Xavier about their rental situation, hoping to ensure some stability for his family. Fearing that the confrontation would become heated, he took a firearm with him that had once belonged to Alexandra's grandfather. He arrived at the chalet as the children got home from school and waited with them for their dad to arrive. According to David, when Xavier showed up, he told him that he was fed up with being moved around and demanded a guarantee from the landlord that things would improve. As he had anticipated, Xavier was less than agreeable, and soon, a heated discussion had turned into a physical altercation. He claimed he had fired a shot in self-defense, and when Xavier collapsed, he realized that he had killed him. Then he remembered the children were there, and went on a rampage, killing one after the other so as to eliminate all of the witnesses. Letitia and Gregory were having an afternoon snack in the kitchen when their neighbor opened fire on them. Then he went to look for Sarah upstairs, where he found her in her room and shot her too. Lastly, he went down to the basement where Graziella had just entered, unaware of the fact that her whole family had just been massacred. She too was met with a gunshot and died shortly after. David told police that he then wrapped the bodies of all of the victims in sheets found in the chalet and carried them out to Flactif's Land Cruiser one by one. With the bodies out of the house, he spent some time cleaning up the murder scene. When he was done, he filled a couple of canisters with gasoline and drove 10 kilometers where he found an isolated spot in the woods. He started a bonfire, then carried the bodies and laid them on top, and watched as the flames devoured them. We'll take a quick break for a word from our sponsors. Some mornings, you just wake up on the wrong side of the bed. Or you have a long day at work and there's still more to do. Maybe you've been feeling like you just can't catch a break. We never know what type of day we'll have, but Calm will help you handle every day. Now, we all have our phones on us most of the time, right? That means Calm's app is right there in your pocket whenever you need it. Their variety of peaceful meditation, music, or soothing soundscapes vary in length and topic, so you can find whatever you need for comfort. My morning wake-up routine takes up less than 15 minutes. I listen to a short guided meditation and do a quick stretch, again guided, and before I know it, I feel revitalized and ready for the day. Throughout the day, though, whenever I have a couple of minutes, I use Calm to guide me with breathing exercises. Calm's sleep stories help me drift off early to recharge my brain while I sleep. And did you know they're also great for getting kids to calm their minds at night so you can rest assured that they're getting the sleep that they need? Try Kate Winslet's Thomas and the North Star, or Henry Golding's rendition of Charlie and the Dream Factory. And see who falls asleep first, you or your kid. I love having access to Calm's varied library of meditations and music, and I can honestly say that I feel way more zen than ever before. So relax. Calm's got everything you need for a happier and healthier you. For Evidence Locker listeners, Calm is offering an exclusive offer at 40% off a Calm premium subscription at calm.com/evidence. Go to calm.com/evidence for 40% off unlimited access to Calm's entire library. That's calm.com/evidence. You can find the link in today's show notes or on our website. Now, let's resume today's episode. It did not take long for the news of the arrests to spread through the small Alpine community. 4 of their own was accused of murder, and they demanded to know more. The police called a press conference during which a spokesperson said the following. The suspect said he had a violent altercation with Flactif, with whom he was apparently on very bad terms that evening, over payment for a couple of odd jobs that he had done for him and a few hours of cleaning that his wife did in the chalet. The sum involved is derisory, a few €100. Townspeople were confused. Why would this group of local residents massacre an entire family? A local villager spoke to French newspaper Le Parisien, speaking plainly, saying this about Xavier Flactif. He didn't have many friends here, and that is an understatement. He ripped a few people off and he was flashy with his money. But I don't think anyone seriously thought he might have been killed, and certainly not his kids. They were guilty of nothing. When David Hotjat's motive for murder came to light, the truth was very unsettling indeed. David was intensely jealous of Xavier Flactif's success. They were both originally from the north of France and had similar qualifications. Neither of them came from money. Yet Xavier managed to accumulate wealth, and instead of being inspired by him, David envied him. In a press conference, police noted that both Xavier Flactif and David Hotjat came from the same region and said they were investigating possible links to their collective past. A police spokesperson said, "In a way, I hope there was more to it. 5 lives for a row between neighbors is difficult to stomach." David Hotjat agreed to cooperate with the police and led them to the location in the woods where he claimed to have built a bonfire and burned the remains of the Flactif family. According to Hotjat, it took about 3 hours for the bodies to be reduced to almost nothing. Police saw that there had indeed been a fire at the spot, but 5 months after the fact, it was somewhat overgrown. However, when the forensic team arrived, they managed to find bone particles, vertebrae, a milk tooth, cervical vertebrae. Eventually, the fragments were all linked to the 5 Flactifs. Still, the police were skeptical about David's story, especially the part about the destruction of the remains. At the high altitude in April, with the humidity and intermittent snow, a fire is unlikely to burn to such a degree that it would destroy the remains of 5 human bodies within 3 hours. Investigators decided to conduct a reconstruction using pig carcasses, dressed and wrapped in sheets, waiting for a night with similar weather conditions and building a fire at the location where David Hatyat said he had made a bonfire. The results were much different to what they had found with David's fire. Which means something in his story did not add up. The pig carcasses were only cremated about 20%. Why would Hatyat lie about how he discarded of the remains? Determined to uncover the truth, investigators built another fire, one that would be big and warm enough to cause the level of cremation that occurred. It had to have been a funeral pyre of about 3 meters by 3 meters and 1 meter high. This could only have been done with 180 kilograms of wood. What this experiment proved was that the bonfire must have been prepared before David arrived in the woods with the bodies. This was not an argument gone wrong and a desperate attempt to cover up his crime. It was the premeditated murder of a family. Also, logically, it was too much for one person to have done all of this in such a limited amount of time. Alexandra, Stefan, and Isabel were suspected of assisting David after the fact in cleaning up after the murders. Once in custody and unaware of David's confession, they all told the exact same story. David had gone to confront Xavier, then he snapped and killed the entire family. The only problem was their stories were too similar. It was clear that it had been rehearsed, and that they all threw David under the bus. However, interrogators persisted, and eventually Stefan opened up and told a chilling story. According to him, he and David had planned to kill the Flactif family on April 9th. Stefan was supposed to attack the kids and strangle each of them with a rope. David would then handle Xavier and Graziella. However, as they walked up to the Flactif chalet that day, Stefan got cold feet and couldn't go through with it. David was furious and made it clear that he was disappointed in Stefan. 2 days later, David went ahead with the plan himself. Confronted with this version of the story, David Hatyat came clean to the police about how long he had been planning the crime. His main motive was to buy a comfortable mountain chalet for his family, but knew he would never have the means to do so. 4 months before the murders, he saw a documentary about an Italian-born French criminal, Alfredo Stranieri, known as the classified ads killer. In the 1990s, Stranieri found his victims by responding to classified ads, placed by people selling properties or cars. As soon as he gained access to their homes, he would kill them and appropriate their property. He was eventually caught and sentenced to 22 years in prison for 4 murders and 1 attempted murder. When David Hatyat saw this, he was captivated and felt that he had found a way out of his financial woes. He would identify a property owner, gain their trust, eliminate them, and then take their home. Alexandra, who knew what an impact this story had on David, told police that when he first learned about Stranieri, he said the killer was an idiot for burying the bodies. If he had done a better job of disposing of his victims' remains, he would never have been caught. David reckoned that burning one's victims was the best way of destroying all evidence. For months, David, Alexandra, Stefan, and Isabel discussed the murder. It had become a hobby, an obsession that they could all talk about together. They often had their meals together, gossiping about the Flactif family, with David expressing his deep-seated hatred for Xavier and his determination to eliminate the entire family. A month after confessing, David Hatyat retracted everything and denied any involvement in the murders. He claimed that he was in the Flactif home to confront Xavier when 2 men came in and attacked them all. He was a victim too, being knocked unconscious, and woke up to the massacre after the fact. Fearing that the murders would be pinned on him, he set out to clean up the scene and dispose of the bodies. Police realized they could not trust anything that came out of his mouth. They needed more than speculation and false statements to build their case against their suspect. Firstly, phone evidence contradicted David's statement regarding the timeline of the murders, and that Xavier was the first to die in the heat of an argument. Graziella's last phone call was around 5 p.m. The children typically got back from school shortly after 5. Xavier was still making calls after 6 p.m., so Xavier could not have been killed first. David also claimed that he had shot all the victims with the firearm he had taken with him. However, bloodstain pattern analysis showed that the only pattern consistent with the use of a firearm was on the armchair, which was covered in Xavier's blood. All of the other blood spatter indicated attacks with a blunt instrument. David bludgeoned Graziella and each of the children to death, most likely with a piece of firewood. Gregory and Sarah were the first ones to be killed. A grim reminder of the fact that children were killed was that Nutella was found in a smudge of Gregory's blood. Must have made himself a sandwich and was attacked shortly after arriving home. Sarah was attacked near Gregory but tried to get away. Footprint and blood evidence showed that she tried to get out of the back door, but then changed direction and ran for the front door, where her killer caught up with her. Letitia was hiding in her bedroom upstairs, but she was not safe either. The monster who had killed her siblings would not stop until he had finished off the whole family. Blood evidence showed that the victim was on the floor when she was struck by a blunt object. She had been trying to hide behind the bedpost. Graziella was struck as soon as she entered the house in the basement, using the laundry door. She died on the spot, never knowing about the horror that had taken place upstairs. When Xavier arrived home, he found two of his children lifeless in the living area and David Haute waiting for him. Understandably, Xavier lost it, attacking Haute. Realizing that he could not overpower the strong, angered, bereaved father, Haute took out the small pistol in his pocket and fired. As for the disposal of the remains, David and Stefan then spent the next couple of days burning the bodies in sessions at the location shown to police. They patiently waited for the remains to turn to dust while stoking the fire and watching. While David was charged with the murders, Alexander, Stefan, and Isabel were initially only charged with failing to report a crime. However, many people believe that the passionate and opinionated Alexander was the driving force behind the murders. It was said that she often belittled David, comparing him to Xavier and expressing her disgust at David's lack of success. While awaiting trial, Alexandra separated from David, got herself a new boyfriend, and fell pregnant. The press speculated that she did this, hoping to receive a more lenient sentence as an expectant mother. The trial was very emotional as the public became aware of the brutality of the murders. Mario, who was 17 by this time, had to face all the role players in court. He stood strong, facing them down, by his own resolve decided that he will not break down in front of them. In 2006, Haute was found guilty of murdering all 5 members of the Flactif family. He was sentenced to life with a minimum of 22 years. Stefan was handed a 15-year sentence for complicity. Alexandra Lefebvre was sentenced to 10 years for her role in the murders, and Isabel Haremza for 7 for conspiracy and failing to report a crime. They all knew what David was planning to do, yet they did nothing to stop him, nor did they report it to police. Being parents themselves, how could they have allowed this to happen? Today, Alexandra and Isabel are free, having served their sentences. Mario lost his mother, his siblings, and his stepfather, and no matter how long any of the perpetrators spend in jail, he will never get them back. His entire family was wiped out, and for what? The greed of a bunch of lowlives who would stop at nothing to live the high life undeservedly? David Haute never did get the chalet with the mountain view, but instead has to face the 4 walls of his prison cell. We'd like to thank our sponsors Gusto and Calm. For 60% off your first box and 25% off all boxes for 2 months, go to gusto.co.uk and use code EVIDENCE. That's gusto.co.uk. Go to calm.com/evidence for your special offer of 40% and reduce your stress and anxiety through guided meditation, music, sleep stories, and movement. That's calm.com/evidence. If you'd like to read more about this case, have a look at the resources used for this episode in the show notes. Also, visit us on social media to see more about today's case. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also check out our channel on YouTube. If you like what we do here at Evidence Locker, subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you are listening right now, and kindly leave a 5-star review. This was the Evidence Locker. Thank you for listening.